Stop it! Leave him alone! He's just a child! The shout tore from Alara's throat, raw and stinging, tasting of the cheap disinfectant she used to scrub floors and the bile of her own constant gnawing fear. Her hands, red and chapped from the industrial chemicals, instinctively flew out, forming a pathetic human shield between the three sneering teenagers and the small, cowering boy they were tormenting. She was a silhouette of exhaustion, backlit by the harsh fluorescent glare of the exclusive private school's entrance, where she, a pariah in her faded, ill-fitting uniform, was only meant to be invisible. She was the after-hours cleaning crew, the ghost that wiped away the privileged filth. She was nothing. The three boys, all crisp blazers and inherited arrogance, stopped mid-shove. They didn't even see her at first. They saw a wall, a temporary, inconvenient obstacle. When they finally registered the sight, a woman barely holding herself together, smelling faintly of bleach and desperation, their cruelty sharpened. Well, 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 drawled the tallest one, his expensive leather backpack slung casually over one shoulder. His name was Julian, and his father owned half the city's high-rises. He reeked of entitlement. Look what the mop dragged in. Isn't past your bedtime, cleaning lady? Or did you think you could use your break to audition for Mother Teresa? Alara felt the familiar hot rush of shame flood her cheeks, a deeper, more profound heat than any fever. It was a burn she'd carried since she was 16, since the day her own mother had walked away, leaving Alara to handle the mountain of debts, the eviction notices, and the chilling silence of an abandoned apartment. She was used to being invisible, but when she was seen, it was only for scorn. She swallowed past the lump of humiliation, her focus remaining fiercely on the small child, who was sobbing silently now, clutching a muddy, tattered action figure to his chest. He couldn't have been older than 7, yet his eyes held a vast, unsettling loneliness that echoed her own. "He's hurt," Alara managed, her voice a reedy whisper that she willed into firmness. "He fell. Just walk away. I won't say anything." Julian laughed, a brittle, ugly sound that drew the attention of the few lingering parents waiting for their own precious progeny. None of them, of course, would ever look Alara's way. To them, she was part of the furniture, easily dismissible, certainly not a person worth getting involved with. "He cried because he lost the soccer game," Julian corrected, taking a deliberate, menacing step closer, forcing Alara to instinctively backpedal and draw the little boy further behind her thin frame. "He's a loser. Like all his fathers, we were just teaching him a lesson." He let his eyes rake over Alara's worn uniform, her painfully scrubbed face, and the threadbare coat she'd salvaged from a dumpster. "And who are you to teach us a lesson? You couldn't afford the dirt on our shoes." The words were a physical blow. They weren't new insults, but they always landed. They sliced through the precarious, threadbare fabric of her self-worth. Couldn't afford the dirt on their shoes. How true. She was working 3 jobs this cleaning gig, a diner waitress from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. and selling tiny, carefully crocheted scarves online just to keep the lights on in her cramped, leaky apartment. Every dollar she earned went to pay off the endless compounding debt her father before he vanished into the same void her mother had so generously left her. She lived on instant noodles and shame. She hadn't bought a new item of clothing in 4 years. Her only luxury, her only respite, was helping someone else, a lonely stray cat, an elderly neighbor with heavy groceries, or now, this terrified little boy. "Focus, Alara," a fierce little voice commanded inside her head, the same voice that forced her to get out of bed every morning. "Don't let them see you shatter. Protect him." The boy, Mateo, was trembling, his small hand gripping the back of her uniform jacket like a lifeline. She felt the frantic beat of his tiny heart against her thigh. She risked a quick, reassuring glance down. His eyes, a striking, unusual shade of glacial gray, were wide with terror. His expensive school jacket was ripped at the shoulder. "Look, I'm calling security," Alara said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. It was a desperate bluff. The security guard was an older man who took his cues from the wealth of the students' parents, and he would never side with a cleaner. "Just go." Julian's face twisted in an expression of pure, refined nastiness. He didn't believe her bluff. and he clearly enjoyed the power he wielded. He raised his hand, not to hit her, but to casually flick his fingers and slap the side of her face. The humiliation was designed to be public and minimal, yet devastating. "You call anyone you like, sweetheart. Let's see who they listen to." He didn't make contact. He didn't get the chance. If you've ever wished someone strong would step in when no one else would, when you were at your lowest, most vulnerable, most alone, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about love that defies all the rules and people who refuse to be broken. The air in the sterile, brightly lit hallway suddenly became thick, heavy, and silent. It was a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure, a drop in the barometric reading, just before a deadly storm. Julian's hand froze inches from Alara's cheek. The three bullies simultaneously went rigid, their faces paling from smug arrogance to naked fear. The few parents who had been lingering outside the door suddenly seemed to find a desperate, compelling need to look at their phones, their keys, the ceiling, anything but what was happening. Even little Matteo behind her stopped his quiet sobbing. Alara didn't have to turn around to know. The shift in the atmosphere, the sudden overwhelming aura of lethal authority, was all the confirmation she needed. It felt like the temperature had plummeted 20 degrees, and a predator had entered the room. A voice cut through the terrified quiet. It wasn't a shout, it was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that needed no amplification to carry a threat. It was calm, it was measured, and it was absolutely devoid of warmth. "The three of you will move away from my son, now." Alara finally risked turning her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a terrified, caged bird. Standing there, framed in the doorway that led to the private parking lot, was a man who seemed to have been forged from shadow and steel. He was tall, impossibly so, and dressed in a bespoke, immaculate black suit that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. He had the kind of stark, intimidating handsomeness that belonged on a villain in a classic film, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. His hair was dark, slicked back with ruthless precision, and his eyes, those same shocking glacial gray eyes that she had just seen filled with tears on the little boy, were fixed on the three teenagers with an expression so cold and concentrated it felt like the very air was about to shatter. This was no ordinary wealthy parent. This was the kind of man whose presence didn't just command a room, it annihilated it. Julian, the ringleader, stammered out a pathetic, unrecognizable sound. Mr. Volkov. "Sir, you were touching what is mine," the man, Dmitry Volkov, corrected him, his voice still low, yet each word was an impeccably placed shard of glass. He didn't shout, he didn't even raise his hand, he simply held their gaze, "and you were touching the woman who was protecting him." His gaze shifted from the bullies to Alara. In that moment, the entire world narrowed to the space between them. For the first time, Dmitry Volkov truly looked at her. He didn't see the faded uniform, the red, raw hands, or the shadow of exhaustion under her eyes. He seemed to see her, the fierce, trembling core of courage that had stood up against 3 times her size and 10 times her wealth. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. The security guard would have just fired her. This man, the little boy's father, the Mafia boss, whose name whispered in hushed, terrified tones across the city's power structures, was going to do something far worse. He wasn't going to punish her for protecting his son. He was going to punish her for daring to exist in his sphere, for interrupting, for drawing attention. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the devastating pronouncement, the final absolute humiliation. When she opened them, Julian and his 2 accomplices were gone, having melted into the night like ghosts on a midnight express, having recognized that to linger a second longer would be to sign their own death warrants, or worse, their father's ruin. Dmitry Volkov hadn't moved a muscle, yet the air where they stood was still vibrating with their fear. He then knelt down, his expensive suit fabric pulling taut across his powerful shoulders, dropping him down to his son's level. It was the only movement that wasn't menacing. It was utterly tender. "Matteo," he said, his voice instantly softening by perhaps the smallest degree, but to Alara, it sounded like the sudden, surprising quiet after a bomb blast. "Are you hurt, Mosard says?" "My heart." Matteo threw himself into his father's arms, his small body convulsing with delayed sobs. "Papa, they said you were bad. They said—" "They are irrelevant," Dmitri interrupted, gently running a large, perfectly manicured hand over his son's ruffled hair. "Only two things matter, Mali." He looked up, his glacial gray eyes finding Alara again, pinning her in place. "Are you safe now? And who was brave enough to stand for you?" He stood up, rising slowly, inexorably, until he loomed over her. He was taller than she'd thought, a wall of pure, controlled force. He smelled of expensive cologne, Italian leather, and something dark and clean, like gunmetal and winter air. "And now we come to you," he said. His voice was no longer soft for his son. It was back to that dangerous, commanding frequency. Alara's mouth was too dry to speak. "He's going to ask the school to fire me. He's going to sue me. He's going to make sure I never find work again. This is it. Your name," he commanded. "Alara," she whispered, the name sounding fragile and pathetic. "Alara Vance." He took another step toward her, closing the distance, and the danger escalated instantly. His presence was so intense, she felt a dizzying wave wash over her. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the man in front of her was not just wealthy. He was the kind of power that could erase people, that could make the very ground shake. "Alara Vance," he repeated, savoring the sound of it, testing it. "You shielded my son. You chose to face ridicule and violence from boys who could destroy your life with a word, for a child who is nothing to you." He reached out, his hand moving with deceptive slowness, and gently, with the tip of one finger, he brushed a single strand of damp, dark hair off her cheek. The brief, unexpected touch sent a jolt through her, a dizzying, forbidden sensation that momentarily eclipsed her fear. "Why?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. It was the first human, seeking question she'd heard from him. "Tell me why you risked everything." Alara finally found her voice, fueled by the last drop of that stubborn courage. "Because," she said, her chest heaving, "no one should ever have to stand alone when they are a child." The words spilled out, raw and unguarded, a tiny window into the pit of her own past, the cold, silent nights in the abandoned apartment, the hunger that gnawed, the shame of wearing salvaged clothing to school. "I know what it is to be a ghost begging for a shield." They were cowards, and he was frightened. Someone had to say stop. The truth was, she knew that look in Mateo's eyes. She had been that child, the one without a defender. Her father had been a good man once, before the debt and the drinking consumed him. But when the debt collectors came, the threats were never aimed at him. They were aimed at her, the quiet, defenseless girl in the corner. Her mother, the same. When her mother walked out, she did it silently, leaving Alara to face the storm alone. "I am not going to be like them. I will not stand by." A flicker of respect, curiosity passed through Dmitri Volkov's formidable expression. He studied her, absorbing the raw, fierce honesty in her exhausted eyes. "You are poor," he stated, not as a question but as an observation, a fact as clear to him as the air they breathed. "You have nothing, yet you offered the only thing you possess, your own safety. A foolish trade." Alara flinched, the casual cruelty of his truth-telling stinging more than Julian's taunts. "It was the right thing to do," she insisted, her chin lifting fractionally, a minuscule act of rebellion. Dmitri smiled, but it was a wolf's smile, sharp, brief, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the most dangerous thing she had seen all evening. "No, Alara Vance," he corrected her, leaning in so his voice dropped to a conspiratorial, intimate rumble that vibrated through her bones. "It was the courageous thing to do. And in my world, courage is rarely rewarded with safety." He paused, letting the fear build again, letting her truly grasp the gravity of her intersection with his world. He was a force of destruction, and she was a speck of dust in his path. "But sometimes," he continued, pulling back just slightly, and a subtle shift occurred in his posture, a possessiveness that was shocking in its suddenness. "Sometimes it is claimed." He reached out again, and this time, he didn't touch her face. He reached for her hand, the raw, scarred, perpetually red hand of a woman who worked until she broke. His fingers, long and strong, wrapped around hers, a stark contrast of power and fragility. Alara watched, mesmerized, as he gently turned her palm over. His touch was both terrifying and electrifying, a spark of pure, forbidden connection. "The boys who touched you," he murmured, his gaze never leaving her hand. "The ones who ridiculed you. They belong to fathers who will pay for their insolence. I will attend to them." His voice was clinical, a statement of fact, like scheduling a dentist appointment. He wasn't threatening them. He was simply signing their economic, and perhaps their physical, death warrants. It was a terrifying glimpse into the abyss of his power. "But first," he said, finally looking back into her eyes, "I will attend to the one who risked everything for my son." Before Alara could utter a single confused or fearful protest, he was pulling her with him, not violently, but with an irresistible, undeniable force, a gentle tug that was more commanding than any shout. Matteo, still clutching his father's jacket, looked up at her with those startling gray eyes, no longer terrified, but curious. "Come," Dimitri commanded, leading her toward the large, black armored car that had appeared silently outside, an imposing monolith in the night. "You will not scrub another floor. You will not stand another humiliation, not for a single day more." Alara stumbled, her exhausted legs protesting. "Wait, Mr. Volkov, you don't understand. I need the job. You have courage," he interrupted, opening the rear door of the black car and ushering his son in first. He then turned back to her, and the sheer force of his will, his ruthless focus, obliterated her feeble protests. He saw the debts, the past, the humiliation, and he saw, with terrifying clarity, a solution that was entirely his own. "You have debts," he corrected her, his hand resting lightly, possessively, on the small of her back. She could feel the heat and the hard muscle through her thin uniform. "Those debts are now mine to handle. You will no longer run from them, and you will no longer chase after the crumbs of this world." "But why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. You can't buy my life. I'm not for sale." Dmitri Volkov's smile was slow this time, and utterly possessive. It wasn't warm, but it held a strange magnetic pull, a hint of something deeper and far more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. He leaned in close again, his breath warm against her ear, and the words he spoke were not a suggestion. They were a declaration, a claim. "You risked everything for my child, Alara Vance. You showed me a fire I haven't seen in a decade. That courage is an asset, a precious thing, and I never let anything of value go undefended." He pulled her fully into the intimidating, luxurious darkness of the car's interior, shutting the world and its relentless humiliations outside with a quiet, decisive thud. The leather seats were cool and soft against her worn uniform. Matteo was already settled, looking at her with a quiet, almost shy curiosity. Dimitri settled in beside her, and the space was suddenly too small, too intimate. He didn't touch her, but his shoulder was a solid, undeniable heat, inches from hers. The air thrummed with unspoken danger and an escalating, terrifying attraction. He looked at her, his glacial eyes boring into her soul, seeing past the layers of shame and exhaustion, straight to the fragile, resilient core. "From this moment, no one touches you," he said. The words a low, indelible vow spoken in the velvet-smooth Russian accent that hinted at the dark, powerful roots of his empire. The darkness that had terrified her was now being offered as a shield. "No one disrespects you. No one can fire you. The world that laughed at you, it now answers to me." He reached out, his hand sliding behind her head, his thumb resting gently, possessively, on her jawline. He wasn't asking for permission. "You're mine.